Good morning, everyone. My name is Radhika Obesekara. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Sri Lanka Institute of Directors. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar discussion. Before we start, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to SLID and Stax, who we are and what we hope to offer you, given the significant changes in our business environment. At SLID, we are focused on helping our members achieve corporate governance through our board leadership programs, as well as regular seminars and interactive sessions. These are conducted not only in Colombo, but also in the outstations in partnership with our provincial trade chambers. I believe our focus going forward in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic will be to support directors both individually as well as collectively in performing their corporate governance duties as they steer their companies through and beyond the present crisis. Today's program, in partnership with Stax, as the title indicates, is the first of its type in this new direction. To introduce our partner on this session, Stax is Sri Lanka's leading management consultancy firm, headquartered in Boston and offices in Chicago, New York, and Colombo. With more than 25 years of experience, Stax advises the world's largest public and private corporations, private equity firms, their portfolio operations groups, and portfolio companies across a broad range of industries covering 40+ international markets. With that said, I'd like to hand over the session to our moderator for today, Mr. Kumudu Gunasekara, Managing Director of Stax. Enjoy your session, and a quick reminder to send in your questions as we progress. Thank you. Over to you, Kumudu.
Thanks, Radhika, and welcome all for today's panel discussion on how companies and the corporate sector can really thrive during the uptake. I'd like to thank SLID, especially Mr. Rasaya, who's the president of SLID, and Radhika and Faisal, who's the vice president of SLID, for putting this fabulous panel together. I know they gave a lot of thought in identifying folk from different industries, different backgrounds, so that we can get a holistic view as to how the Sri Lanka's corporate sector could grow from here. Before we start the panel discussion, I'll take a few minutes to really go through some of the emerging trends and stuff that we have seen from a Stax perspective, working with both global as well as local firms, pre-COVID, post-COVID scenarios. With that, I'll get down to the presentation. If you go to the next slide, I think if you look at, it's important to understand this session is about thriving during the bounce back. But before we get to the bounce back, there's really two stages. So if you look at the situation we are in right now, there is a three-stage process. There's a lockdown phase, which we are currently in. There is the post-lockdown survival phase. And then there is the post-survival uptick phase when the whole global economy starts picking up. So it's really important that while we are talking about the third stage here, there is real issues right now that companies have to deal with. This slide really shows you from a US economic perspective. I'm looking at different countries, and if you look at the US economy, is one of the largest economies, and for Sri Lanka being our largest export partner is one of the most relevant economies. So if you look at here, during past global events, World War I, II, the Spanish flu, all of those events, you see the downward trend in US GDP. So the worst is has happened is during World War II, it's about a negative 25% drop in GDP. If you go to the next slide, it really shows the next slide shows what the US GDP is doing today. We saw historically during global events how the US GDP has progressed, but the Q1 numbers just came out last week, of almost a 5% drop in GDP. And what is more scary is for Q2, the forecast is a 40% drop. That's unprecedented. During World War I, it was a 25. The worst is what we've seen is a 25% drop. So now we are seeing a 40% drop in US GDP for Q2. Sorry, there's a typo here. This is a Q2 GDP estimate. If you go to the next slide, you really see the magnitude of this impact on the job market, right? The jobless claims in the US has gone up to 30 million people have filed for unemployment. 30 million people, that is 1/5 of the workforce, 20% of the workforce in the US have filed for unemployment. Now, this is despite the government having a very good stimulus program called, they have the Paycheck Protection Program, which the phase one of it had $350 billion allocated to it, which basically gave small and medium-sized companies paycheck protection. If they keep their existing workforce, they are going to pay back. Basically, the government is going to pay for 8 weeks the payroll for those companies. So there was a real good program in place, despite that 20% or almost 20% of the working population has filed for unemployment. Now let's look at the context for Sri Lanka. We don't have this type of support. The government doesn't have the money. As a country, we don't have this type of support like the PPP program. So the message that I'm trying to convey is we are in the lockdown phase. So we are all kind of, I think, not realizing the impact and the magnitude of the economic impact that this will have in the country during the survival phase. There's going to be a lot of upheaval, a lot of changes, and we need to be prepared for those changes in order to make use of the uptick. Now, if you go to the next slide, what we know about global pandemics, and if you look at historically, whenever there is a global event, there are trends that occur that will really create multi-billion-dollar businesses. So as we speak today, there are folks, SMEs, large corporations, relatively large corporations, adapting to the new normal and will become significant billion-dollar companies post-COVID. So now our challenge is, how do we make few of our Sri Lankan companies partake in this journey and really become global players? When we talk about 5 trends really that impact, that we feel that will have an impact post-COVID. And these 5 trends are none of these trends are new. These are trends that have been in place, or these trends were occurring over the last 10, 15 years. But what has happened is all these trends will now become accelerated, and they are going to become permanent adaptation by consumers and businesses. So we need to understand these trends. Now, these trends, how you adapt these trends by industry will differ. Each industry will have very different nuanced ways to tackle this. But from a macro perspective, there are 5 trends. The first trend is virtualization of events, activities, and interactions. What's going to happen? I mean, if you look at from a local context, let's take the example of ODOC. Doctors virtually consulting with patients. ODOC has been there for the last 4 or 5 years. It's been a startup that was fledgling, going through a lot of problems. Suddenly, huge uptake. The biggest, doctors didn't even sign up. Doctors said, hey, you can't do virtual consultations. But now today, for a whole month, bulk of consultations happen via ODOC, or ODOC and other platforms that So we are adapting to virtualization. What will that happen to hospital visits? What will happen is, if you take doctor visits, I would say about 75–80% of those doctor visits are very routine ones that you can actually do virtually. And then you'll have the 20% cases where you need the touch and feel, you need to kind of see the patient. Those are the ones that will actually visit hospitals. So uh, another example is remote working. We have, I mean, what we are doing right now. The challenge for all businesses is going to be, are we, once lockdown is lifted, are we going to bring 100% of our workforce back into offices? Or are we going to radically change this and make our companies 50% of our employee base work from home, continue to work from home? Productivity hasn't really changed. I'm working with a lot of companies, people are adapting. What will that happen to commercial real estate? You will need half the space. If you're doubling your office, you double your office by remote access. So those are all things that companies will start thinking from a virtualization perspective. The second process is the automation of processes and services. I mean, it's interesting. Most of our services, most companies that we've been working for the last 2–3 years have been going through this automation process. Now that's going to get accelerated. All tasks. I mean, there's an interesting case study in Cyprus where when the lockdown happened, the problem statement was, how do I walk my dog? That was solved by getting drones. So drones are now used in Cyprus to walk their dogs because you couldn't physically walk the dog out. So that the adaptation of these processes being automated is going to be key. And we can see in Sri Lanka itself, a 100-year-old industry, and I'm sure Vish will talk a lot about it when we do a panel discussion, the tea industry is now starting to get automated. It's a small step, but it's starting to get automated. Now, will that remain after post-COVID or not? That's a question to be answered. The third emerging trend is pure play and hybrid online marketplaces. So now globally, we've seen a shift away from brick and mortar. I mean, today, J. Crew, which is used to be one of the largest retail stores in the US, filed for bankruptcy. Not because of COVID, it was anyway that the trend was away from brick and mortar towards more online or hybrid marketplaces. That's a trend that was happening. It's going to get accelerated. Do we really believe that consumers will now go back to going into brick and mortar, into supermarkets? Do we go back into supermarkets, or do we, now that we have started using, we know our 5 to 10 suppliers that we deliver online, do we stick with those? So will that be a structural change, and how would companies adapt to that? The fourth element is the diversification of supply chain. This also was a trend that was happening, what this talks about is basically the supply chain in most companies were limited to 1 or 2 suppliers, and most of them based in China because of the cost arbitrage. What was happening is there was a gradual shift away from them, and geographic diversification became a cornerstone. And companies that we are working with, global companies are looking at other Asian destinations to source material. Great opportunity for Sri Lanka, and how we make advantage of that is going to be critical. And the last trend that was already in place was customer intimacy. It's really about hyper customization to the customer, be it B2C or B2B. That in the past it was about giving low cost products. Now it's no longer about that. It's about giving convenience to the customer, and customer is going to be much more demanding because there's going to be a lot more options out there for your products. So how do you bring data and digital and other aspects into your organizations to become more customer intimate with the customer, understanding their order patterns before they even order? If I'm doing a supermarket, if I'm doing a weekly order, 90% of it is the same order. I shouldn't be actually putting text and saying, I need milk, eggs, butter. It should just come on a weekly basis, because if you track for 3 months, you know your buying patterns. So you should be, so these are kind of 5 trends that are occurring that will really change how businesses and consumers operate in the future. If you go to uh, the next slide talks about, just to shows, yeah, the next slide, I just wanted to show this slide about the trend that was happening. When I mentioned that these are trends that have been happening for the last, you know, 5-6 years. This is about diversification of supply chain. You know, this is just data from 2014 to 17, and this has really heightened after the US-China trade war in 2019. But even in 2014 to 17, you see the trend. There was a 3% drop in exports from China, and that 3% was captured mainly by Vietnam. That's why we see Vietnam as becoming you know, from an export perspective, much larger than Sri Lanka and other countries. Vietnam wasn't that big, but they really captured on this. So now this trend is going to become really big, and how Sri Lanka adapts to it is a question. The next slide, which is the final slide, really talks about what we are doing with companies and how companies are adapting to this. If you look at it, there's really 3 elements to it. One is during the lockdown phase, enhancing the resilience across people, process, and technology. So how do you adapt to remote working? Making sure that, you know, remote working is not just about technology. It's about the human angle to it. How do you adapt people to be productive in a remote setting? So there's a lot that goes into it. Identifying contactless workarounds of physical processes. So there are a lot of physical processes that we keep doing that can be done without human touch. And another thing is kind of disparate. If you go to a company, you see technology systems are disparate. There are many systems and not talking to each other. How do you really bring it to a cloud solution, cloud, and then really be able to talk to each other? That's one element of it. The second and most important, another important element is ensuring cash flow stability. Invoice collections, vendor management, it becomes very critical, right? So you want to ride this. It's going to take, the survival phase may take as long as 6 months for us to really be ready for the uptake. So we really need to invest in cost optimizing initiatives. So it's not about not spending, it's about spending wisely. What do you spend in is going to be critical. And the third one is really having a game plan, a 6-month game plan, priority plan in terms of identifying. Most companies, everybody who has a company has some ideas of, hey, before COVID, they had 10 things that they have listed that they want to do. Let's relook at those 10 things and see, does these 10 things really help us win in a post-COVID world? There may be new initiatives that we need to come up with. We need to re-engage with our strategic accounts and so forth. So really have a 6-month plan. Unfortunately, and Sujiva will really dive into this, the larger corporates, what we're seeing is adapting to this. They're really kind of figuring out how to survive and succeed in the post-COVID era. The SME sector doesn't have that luxury. They don't have the luxury from a financial perspective, also from a information perspective. Some of the SMEs may not be exposed to these type of thinking. So it's important that we get the SME sector, because if you think about it, SME sector, if they survive, will have the greatest potential to adapt to the new normal because they are agile, they are nimble. Whereas the larger corporates, it's going to be harder because there's a lot of inherent bureaucratic stuff and a lot of investments that have gone in that will make it harder to kind of pivot. So that's kind of, just wanted to give a quick overview of what the new normal could be and what are the trends that happen. So we are going to use this as a base and then start the panel discussion. And in terms of the panel, So let me introduce you the panelist as well. We have, let me just get we have Mr. Nihal Fonseca, member of the Monetary Board, a veteran banker, was the CEO of DFCC, a board member of John Keel's. So exposed to the financial sector as well as from a conglomerate perspective, has a perspective. We have Vish Govindasamy, who's a vice chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, the group managing director of Sunshine Holdings, and has been president in numerous associations from tea to dairy. So has a very wide industry perspective as well. Then we have Mr. Sujiva Samaravira, who is the immediate past president of the National Chamber of Commerce, who really works a lot with the SME sector. And also, from a personal perspective, has a lot of businesses, both in technology and logistics, so understands how to run a business and be successful in running businesses. And our final panelist is my colleague, Ruindu Pires, who's the managing director of Stax, and also the past president of SLASCOM, the industry body for technology, and is the national sectoral expert for technology for the EDB as well. So with that, I welcome all the panelists, and we'd like to begin the panel discussion. I'd like to structure the panel so that we first start with a more macroeconomic perspective before we get into the industry level perspective. So from a macro perspective, Nihal, I'd kind of like to understand from you, if you look at the sectors, let me put a broad brush. It's about the balance of payment issue, which is, I think, worrying for a lot of citizens, right? Do we have enough forex to ride 2020 and on to 2021? Nihal?
Yes, thank you, Kumudu. You are right. The balance of payments is a critical factor in this post-COVID era. Even without that, it was a critical factor. So it becomes even more critical now that we have certain disruptions which are coming through. But when you look forward to the near term, the critical issue that we are faced with is the debt service that we have for the current year, because there is about $4.5 billion of debt that needs to be paid. Now, out of that, there is a significant portion which is what you would call bilateral or multilateral borrowings, which we believe there are programs which are being implemented by those institutions to actually give some forbearance. And so the big one that we have is the $1 billion in 2020, the $1 billion international sovereign bond. And in 2021 also, I think we have $1.5 billion of international sovereign bonds to be paid. Now, on the positive side of this, when you look at our balance of payments in 2019, our balance of trade in 2019, we did see an improvement. Actually, even though that will get reversed in 2020 in some ways, but a big positive is the reduction in the import costs of petroleum products for two reasons. One is, of course, the price. The other one is the usage. Taking that into account, there is a big positive coming from there. And also the government has imposed some temporary restrictions on what is considered non-essential imports. And there too, there is a considerable savings that will come into play during the rest of 2020. So for 2020, and also we have been able to secure certain facilities from, apart from the forbearance I spoke about. Already there are facilities that have been secured from the Import-Export Bank or Exim Bank, from the Chinese banks, the China Development Bank, as well as we have got certain short-term facilities which will take us through to the end of this year. And we have enough reserves, even though there can be a drop in the reserves, we are in a better reserve position than we were at the end of 2018 when you talk of the balance of payment. So for 2020, I think we can get by. Now 2021 is of course dependent on how our external trade sector performs. So which is at this point in time, for a variety of reasons that you mentioned, there are threats that are, now when I talked about balance of payments, I have taken into account the fact that tourism receipts will be very, very low this year in 2020. Our remittances from workers also will drop somewhat in 2020. And our export performance will also see a significant reduction in 2020. I mean, those are all givens that we cannot, whatever we do, because that is not dependent on us alone, cannot probably change too much in the rest of 2020. But then these are the other mitigants that have to balance that off. So overall, I think we are okay for 2020. That is our take at the moment. Now 2021 is at this point in time remains to be seen. But we are working on the basis these lockdowns will end. We will get back to, at least as far as the domestic business is concerned, we will get back to a reasonable level of business activity. We can ramp that up. We believe by the third quarter, we will get to a fair degree of normalcy for domestic business. Now, export markets, of course, are a more difficult proposition because that is not. But then you mentioned that there are opportunities also in this whole exercise. So I think we have the next 6 months or so to get into our private sector to see whether they can get in leverage on those opportunities, even if our traditional exports and traditional leisure still remain weak. Whether those billion-dollar businesses that you talked of we may not get $1 billion, but at least we can get moving on that, so that by the end of the year we can. So I think this is a very critical discussion we are having this point in time. If we just depend on our traditional businesses, I think we will have a challenge in 2021. But yeah, I think we have the time to 6 months, I think, perhaps, to get into so that is my take on the balance of payment for 2021.
Thank you, Nihal. I agree, and on that, like to bring in Vish to the discussion as well. And Nihal talks about traditional export industries. So if you take tourism, which is like a $4 billion industry, apparel $5 billion industry, and foreign remittances $7 billion. All three are going to be down. The first two are going to be close to zero in the next, not zero. Tourism is probably done for 2020. Apparel may come back when the European and US markets come in, and foreign remittances are going to be down. So how are we going to, Vish, from a CCC perspective, what do you see as us bridging that gap?
Thanks, Kodu. I think from the CCC's point of view, as you know, a country that has gone through various issues, from a war to a tsunami, and then last April to a huge terrorist attack. I think, unfortunately, we did not respond very well to this pandemic. We knew this was out there in China in early November, December, but we did not really jump back into knowing this is going to hit us for various reasons. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but either government or the private sector, we did not come back. But you stole my thunder about the tea industry. It's a 150-year-old fuddy-duddy industry. But from a first being in shock, they came out strong. After the first 10 days, they knew there was global demand for tea. So they adapted to the e-auction from a call-out auction that has been done for ever so long. I believe the last figures of the tea export is about $1.5 billion. So we will, I think, see an uptick on that. In this last few weeks, we have seen the tea prices going up. I believe currently the production is a bit low because still the workforces, especially in the low-grown sector, have not come back. But the traditional sector in the upcountry is in full-fledged working. We would have normally seen higher crops in April and May, but this year we have not seen that. But the prices are high, and the Middle East has gone into Ramadan now, but they will come back strong and purchase. I'm sure we will have our traditional markets like Russia and the Russian Federation, the old Russian Federation will continue to purchase our tea. And I know when we started this pandemic, there was lots of messages going around about the goodness of tea for the virus, etc. I don't know how far that's true, but I would like it to be true. But I'm confident that tea will be a good product for the country to embrace and make sure. But we should not be dependent as a bulk exporter that we have been in the past. We need to build global brand. We have been traditionally dependent on the government to do the marketing for us. I think it's time the private sector takes that on and do our own global marketing. So I think, while the other sectors are going to be down, the tea sector and the plantation sector can surely jump back.
That's great to hear, Vish, and also with technology adoption across the value chain, hopefully in the tea, some of the pilferage that is happening will decrease as well. So it'll help in terms of efficiencies. Good. In terms of Sujiva, I think from a SME perspective, I know we talked about how the larger corporates have both the cash flow and information to adapt. How can an SME adapt to this situation?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. And I think hopefully can hear me. We actually, if you look at the SMEs sector, we being on the middle-sized companies and the SMEs contributes to about 46% of employment, or more than that, 50% of the employment in Sri Lanka. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Basically, what I'm looking at is a more practical scenario, because we need to go forward. Having the issues here, we need to face it. Now, this is not the last year's issue of having a bomb blast in Colombo, or the previous issues of having the tsunami in Colombo. Unfortunately, both these incidences we have been discussing like this, but whether we did some practice and we came out of that is a question mark. Some have come out, some are still deliberating as to what we should do. But I would look at this as, 4 sectors that the SMEs are worried about. One thing is mainly the markets. Then we are looking at the consumer. Markets and the consumers are come to 2 different situations. The consumer becomes very important here. And our HR, the company is human resources. And also the most important thing is funding. Now, these are the 4 areas that the SMEs or the small or the large scale companies are worried about, because the large companies, as you very correctly said, can reach to anybody. You can take a call to the president or the prime minister or the banks and get things done. But we are at the middle. Some of us are stuck there finding solutions to come out of this whole issue, because we are not being helped by many organizations and we have not got the clout of supporting ourselves there. Now, the other important thing is looking at the markets. For us, it's very bleak, because the SMEs can only operate in the region now, or the province. limited to the provinces. So the business limits are there. Even though there were SMEs whom I knew who had efficiencies of providing around Colombo or workstations, they are now limited to their own area. So that's another thing where the logistics have to be improved. Second thing is about the consumer. The consumer is also affected because if you look at the larger scale companies and bigger organizations cutting down their salaries and various other situations. Personally, I think it's more premature now because if those companies have earned profits and they had enjoyed their profits and they were proud to talk about it in the papers, I think it's too early for us to decide whether we are going for a pay cut or not. As a result of which, the buying power of the people might be less because they will think differently. And where the consumer is affected, because if the consumers do not have the power again to buy the products, again the chain of events can affect the larger companies as well. So we need to rethink the present model into a more extensive thing. Then look at HR. Now, middle-level companies, small companies, and micro companies can't afford to lose people. Right? In this particular scenario, if you lose the best employee by having a sickness, or if the guy is going to be waiting for 2 weeks at home, the company is going to collapse. So the most important thing here is to prefer our HR and seeing how healthy they are. And then there's a certain amount of care that we need to take in doing that. Finally, looking at the practical situation of getting funds. Now I know that lots of us are in the middle size, large size and small scale companies are unable to get the benefits the government is offering. There is two reasons for it. One thing is that you need to walk your talk. The government can announce certain things, but they should have the part in announcing it, how to reach those things. I won't blame the banks for, they also had the last year was bad and they had some difficulties. So they're not very happy of giving out loans, facilities, capital grants without any collateral or security. But when you go, that will only be heard when you go to the bank. But out in the public, it's that, you know, we are giving this kind of loans and you can go and get it out of the counter. But that brings a little blockade for the small sector, the SME sector, which we need to clear. I think we need to be more, to bring clarity into what the processes are so that we don't waste time. For a simple example, you say the curfew passes valid till the 30th of a particular month is valid to the next 30th of a month. You can announce it, but when you run the small companies who are doing the distribution, they have been sent to the police station and the police people will say, go and bring a certificate from the Pradesh Lekam and so forth. So now see, the communication is breakdown. Even though we look at, in a situation where all of us today are waiting for the man who comes out to the road to buy the vegetables. Right? We have no option. Those are the SME guys who are coming up. But unfortunately, those are the guys, if you see on TV, are being questioned and harassed. Why? Because there is no clarity down the line. So we need to, I won't blame the government, but there should be some kind of mechanism to carry down the line because these are, some people are actually trying to give us a service. We can't live without those polemen coming into the street or the vegetable man coming. But the hassle of being clearing, of getting that thing. Then, looking at the much larger sector, if I may say, we need to also think out of the box. How do we think? There is a role that the big private sector company has to play. Government has to play a role, and the SMEs and the small and medium companies has to play a role here. First thing is that we can look at developing products. Some companies have developed certain products and they are selling good in the market. Whether that's going to be continuing or not is something that we need to say, that we have to live within the next 3 months or 4 months, unlike the larger companies. So we will sort of think out of the box, you will develop something and keep developing that. But look at the government situation. What we really want is that the government will also have to think out of the box. They also can't tell the private sector to look at the outlook and go a different way when they are not thinking out of the box. For example, you take the logistics industry. We have to treat the trades differently, and then somebody has to understand the complications of the trade. So when if you're saying our wharf clerks have to go out on the trade, there should be infrastructure facilities provided by the government to sustain their health conditions. I won't blame anybody, but this has to be looked at. So like that, even the government has to look at those things. And also, I think we can learn through experiences. And personally, I can tell you, when the tsunami time happens, then government appointed my old company, I was working there, John Peel, to run the logistics of the tsunami containers delivered to various parts of the country. And that was a good decision taken, and I was head of the division. So we worked 24 hours, the seamless operation. We sent it to the people who are in need. So why can't we, at this moment, get the private sector companies involved in some of these logistics activities so that the burden given to the government is eased off? So that mainly our small scale and the micro companies are having a gateway to address their problems. I mean, I'm looking at a very practical scenario again. There can be complications with these decisions, but that is what one thing I want to say. Finally, I want to say, large companies have to now look at, because we are now having 4 shocks at one time. One is external shock of supply, external shock of demand, then again domestic shock also in supplies and demand. So whilst looking at those 4, large companies have to work with the small companies, try and see whether they can help each other. Try and help each other than reaching out to the foreign countries to give supplies. Try and see whether we can do in Sri Lanka so that some of the subcontracts can be given up to small, large, and micro companies, like what the Japanese people do in the Toyota company or the Nissan company. We go there, study that, but we never implemented that system. So it's time up for us to implement that kind of thing. And we as chambers, and some other chambers are doing a tremendous amount of work. We have the clusters. We can tell that what district, this is what the expertise we have. So I think we need somebody to lead this operation so that we would put together something. And also don't forget about women entrepreneurs, because no one is talking about the women entrepreneurs. They are being harassed and suffered a lot. They are much more helpless than anybody else in this whole scenario. And if you look at the women entrepreneurs, that's a fair amount of employment. And also livelihood, they run their lives. The families are run through their money. So we need to look at them open up. And I'm happy that Women's Chamber has opened up a help desk with the help of, if I was telling you yesterday, with the help of ENY to support them. So at least we need that kind of a solution. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Sujeev. I think that's a lot of good information on some of the challenges faced by the SME sector. Just to round off this balance of payment issue, I'd like to bring Ruindu into the fold. We talked about tourism, apparel, and foreign remittances. We talked about tea. What's the other industry that keeps coming up as the next big industry for Sri Lanka? Is technology. And just wanted to get your views, Ruindu, on in terms of technology was slated to do about $1.5 to $2 billion in export revenue this year in 2020. First question, is that still possible, or will we go over it? And in general, how will that industry react?
Sure. Thanks, Govindu. And I think great points and conversation. And I think in anything, it's really important to start with how you frame the problem, right? I think that has a large implication in terms of how you come out of the problem as well. And interestingly, as you pointed out, Govindu, if you think of our country and as we think of solving for the balance of payment problem, and as Nihal quite correctly laid up, 2020 is going to get managed. It's about 2021 and onwards. What's in store, right? How do we do it? And in fact, I'd argue what we should be solving for is not 2021. It should be the next 10 years. We got to take a longer term view and then invest into that right now, right? The base reality is you need to figure out what's within your sphere of influence, and what's within your influence work with a lot of clarity, intensity, and urgency. And that lays up, I think, the fact that all of us as a country don't consistently even measure what the impact of this industry is. And broadly, what we're terming it is the knowledge and innovation industry, right? That's delivered about $1.8 billion in 2019, in fact. It's been growing at a rate of about 19% for the last 5 years. We've actually tipped to be about $2.2 billion is what we were kind of targeting to kind of hit 2020. To answer your question, I think, is that achievable? probably not the what we had targeted for in 2020, for the simple fact that the whole world is going through the 3 stages you mentioned, right? There is the initial deer in a headlight lockdown situation. No one's kind of knowing what's going to happen. People are going to have to come through the survival stage. But if you really kind of then project out beyond that, and I'm borrowing from what you shared earlier, all those realities, that the trends that were in play are all enabled through knowledge and innovation. Every one of those have been enabled, and we take it for granted, right? I think all of us, the fact that we are surviving through this period of the lockdown is fundamentally enabled because of the technological advancements, right? So without a doubt, that's just going to really fast track, and the demand and the need for that's going to really intensify. So if there is one industry that really can see through and be able to truly kind of propel the whole country, is absolutely this knowledge and innovation industry. And I think it's also important to, and as I said earlier, it's how we frame this, right? And I think one of the biggest opportunities for us is, up to now, that industries got viewed as purely IT or BPM. That's kind of been, although we've been concerted from SUSCOM itself. If you go back over the last 2 years, we did a concerted effort. In fact, even the chamber name was changed from the IT BPM industry chamber to the knowledge and innovation industry, for the fact that I think as a country, we need to really embrace this. And I'll give you a quick example. Cisco Labs is now globally reimagining how food will get done from farm to fork, right? And that whole enablement is happening from Sri Lankan engineers. Now, shame on all of us as a country that we have had that talent and that capacity to think, but we haven't reimagined tea and really been able to take that to the rest of the world. And I think that's the opportunity for us to reframe our industries and really think of the composite of all of these coming together, and include that into what we deem as knowledge and innovation, right? So I think Nihal laid it up really well. Is the opportunity for us right now is to kind of, how do we amalgamate? I think a lot of the themes that came out was around collaboration, not reinventing the wheel. How are the SMEs going to be able to take advantage? Huge collaborative platforms. You don't have to do it on your own, right? We know the largest hotel in the world is Airbnb, simply because of the shared economy. We need to really start doing the same thing. So I'm going to end with the fact that I think the opportunity, and maybe we'll delve into this a bit more in terms of really spending the next while for practical solutions, is, I know while I'm very sensitive to hard realities that our people are facing right now, I also want to remind ourselves that this is not something new. If you go through, humanity's had multiple pandemics, multiple events, right? So the ones that we probably kind of talk about is the 20 in the 1930s, and then in the 2008s. And if you frame those, we were in the industrial age during the 1930s, in that early stage. Who came out of that really successfully was those who really had the determinants of success in their favor. Those who had free capital in the industrial age were able to really propel and become the big giants post that in the thrive stage. 2008 comes around, we were in the digital age, right? Digital was a determinant of success. And as you'd imagine, the traditional industrial age companies were completely surpassed by the Googles, the Facebooks, any company that was thriving on digital completely took forward and got to the top. Roll around 2020, we got to ask ourselves, what age are we in right now, right? And really the age we're in right now is in the mindset age, right? It's about being able to imagine. It's actually termed the imagination age. So the determinant of success is mindset. And what I want to propose to all of us is really, it's up to us as a country to really have the right mindsets. We've had this technology, we've had the enablements. If you question, really honestly look in the mirror, what has been the inability to kind of take advantage has been our collective mindsets of not being able to adapt to change, absorb change, be willing to, almost at the face of potential disruption of our own livelihoods, be willing to kind of take what has to be done. So I'm going to leave you with that, but a lot of opportunity in my mind.
No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because, all the panelists are coming up with a theme that is that I'm picking up is, we shouldn't go back to doing business the way we were doing before, be it tea, be it technology, be it SME sector, there is a kind of this is an opportunity for us to really create a plan for Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan industries. In that mindset, Nihal, being a veteran banker, banking to me has also been a very traditional industry, and it's been disrupted globally. How do you see our banks adapting to the new reality? And along with that, I'll also pose another audience question that came from a banking perspective, is which is very different to the question that I asked, is about the loan scheme that the banks have, the government as central bank has put forth to the SMEs. There's a lot of murmur that it's not being adapted. There's no clarity. Banks are not actually giving out these loans, or banks don't even know how to do that. So that's kind of react to those 2 points. Yeah.
Thank you, Komudu. Yes, banks. I mean, I will be the first to agree that banks have been very, very traditional and generally embraced the brick and mortar philosophy. I mean, even though they have got various channels, I mean, and invested a lot of money on development of channels, getting various IT infrastructure, the migration of sufficient number of customers and banking habits to those platforms has not really happened to the extent that it should have. And that is a fact. So especially in Sri Lanka, I mean, I won't go into the reasons as to why it has happened. I mean, though I know the reasons, but that has been the case. So now, again, there is now a great opportunity to really make that leap forward, because for most banks, the ability and the technology is in place. It is not that they have not invested in those. It is just the question that the people who are driving the what you call the mindset change of the customers, and more than the customers, of people inside the banks, to actually make that change, to basically deliver services on a much more cost-effective and efficient platform. Okay, there is, I mean, internet banking, there is telephone banking, all those things are there, but the penetration of those are still very relatively low. We are still into, okay, we may have gone away from counters to ATMs, but then ATMs are as expensive and inefficient as counters. I mean, or maybe slightly less so. So I think, yes, this is actually a good eye-opener for banks, because for whatever, somehow they have managed to provide a certain level of service through this whole this shutdown. And maybe there are deficiencies, but I mean, it has happened. Now, now one issue, now before I transfer to the other issue, I mean, I'd like to point out one of the fundamental problems that we have in the COVID response here. Now, in many other countries, the government had borne the brunt of the risk of new bank lending. I mean, if you look at the UK or any other country, there are government guarantees that have been given to banks for the new lending that is going to take place. Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, the government has no capacity to do that, because we started COVID from a fairly weak position in respect to the fiscal position. So basically, this has now passed to the banks. So as the point that was made was, now one has to bear in mind, the banks are primarily responsible to their depositors. Now, the point that is made, that there's a question which is pending, I think, which I'll address it now, that since it is already there, is now there is some argument going on whether this so-called interest period, the first 3 months or first 6 months of this interest, is it a complete waiver or is it a deferment? Now the question of deferment is providing liquidity. Question of waiver is providing profits to the beneficiary of that waiver. Now, at a time like this, what is very critical is liquidity. So I think the banks worked on the basis that they will move to provide liquidity to businesses by not collecting whatever is due to them. Now there is another school which is saying no, this should be waived. Now the banks have pointed out the valid problem. They have to pay interest to depositors. Typically, they make 4% on the margin. So instead of a 4% plus, if they go to a minus 10% on which they have to keep paying to depositors, because depositors are not going to say you waive that. Now we are going to put the banking industry in a serious, we are going to face a serious problem. So that is actually the repercussions of that are being looked at the moment. So that is why there is this delay. I think it was started off on the basis of it being deferred. It will be paid later when the liquidity situation improves. But then there are some people, I'm not blaming them, obviously. I mean, they're saying, no, you should waive it. Now, there's a difference between profit and, to me, today, profit is not something that you need to focus on today. I mean, because first of all, you have to live to get through to make profits. And to live, you need liquidity. So the banks have been focused on providing liquidity. So this is that debate that is going on. Hopefully there will be a resolution on one form or another. I can't tell you what the result will be in the next couple of days. Now okay, where the banks can help, the problems that was mentioned that it is not reaching the right people. I agree that there are serious weaknesses in that. I mean, it's not only in Sri Lanka. They have said that even in these countries which have given this support, I read in the US that a lot of the restaurants have said your scheme can't work and have to return the money, because if you can't open, you can't. There is no. There are some criteria which cannot be met. So now here, one factor that the banks have to deal with is the fact that even before COVID, they were having a problem with their asset quality. Non-performing loans were rising because of various other factors, partly due to the last April attacks and all of that. And now on top of that, they had been asked to take higher risk without the ability of any kind of a government backstop on support. Now, one issue that they have is to make sure that the money that is given to these people get used for that purpose, because one of the reasons why, especially in the SME sector, I know there are people who will disagree, is that there is a tendency that people in good times use the money for all sorts of non-business purposes. And so they have no, I mean, they use it as their personal wealth, and then it sort of gets dissipated on various things. So now the banks are somewhat worried as to, now what is the mechanism that is available to make sure. Now, I was having a discussion, I mean, I don't know enough about the technology platform. Now somebody said, if they are, the traditional way is the bank gives some overdraft, that guy draws the check and uses it to, hopefully to do what he should be doing. But quite often he just thinks that he should not be doing as well. Now somebody said that if you have like a blockchain technology where the bank can also get in onto the whole chain and make sure that the payments go for his business. I'm not talking about cryptocurrency. I'm talking about the platform here, nothing to do with not you use the normal currency. That if you can have something like that, the banks will be much more comfortable in providing this kind of funding in times of need like this, because they know for sure that it will go for a productive purpose.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and so I mean, I think Sujiva was nodding his head, and I think he's must be thinking, hey, why is, and I let Sujiva react to this as well. You know, why the SMEs may be feeling, hey, we are being asked to give collateral and give our houses and all this stuff to get a loan, whereas the larger corporates with gearing ratios that are off the roof are getting debt without any issues.
You want me to ask? Basically, like, I agree with what Nihan is saying totally, but we need to find a solution here. I mean, I understand some of the SMEs are also doing that to a certain extent, but the situation here, I think we need to think differently here. For one reason is that we have to find a mechanism how the banks are also going to be comfortable. first thing I must tell you that before COVID also, the banks are not very keen on giving some loan schemes given by the government, passing out to the SME, especially in Uva and various districts. I have personally seen that this kind of gap between the banker and the SME has already been existing. But with this situation came in, government gave more benefits to the SME, and but then this is not communicated properly. Again, we have a bottleneck there. But coming back, this I think where are the chambers? I think Ceylon Chamber, National Chamber, the Industries Chamber, they need to actually give a business. We have something called a credit guarantee scheme. Basically, the chambers looking at the members of SMEs and the large companies should be able to support the banks with a credit guarantee, because they can arrange buyback schemes and various other schemes can be worked out at, you can use those platforms, technology platforms to do that. And we need to develop that kind of coexistence within the sector. And then the banks will be comfortable for one reason. Secondly, how we should be doing it is, now some of the SMEs need definitely a hand-holding concept, and that is for sure. And some of the chambers regionally can always do that. Talking that there should be basically practical situation to this is, practical solution to this is, there should be a small dialogue between the chambers, the business person and the banker, because I believe that the banks also should take a little amount of risks. Because I say that because if there are lots of people who told me when I started the business, there was nobody to give money. I somehow borrowed and mortgaged my house and did the business. When I was going, there are 5 people waiting for me at the door from 5 banks asking me whether I want a loan. Now, is this the situation that we must look at? So we, as Nihal said, we need to really rethink about re-engineer our thinking. Because it's not that you help a banker should also take a risk. I always been reiterating this fact, even though banks not really agreeable with me. But if a business person, I left a blue chip company job and started my own business. I took a risk. I took a risk for life, right? On my EPF money, and that's my personal belief. But then there are other companies, other business people who mortgage their own house, buys jewelry to do the business. So if they can risk the whole life to start a business, that is what we should be encouraging, because we want more and more entrepreneurs to come into the field if we really want to, and how the banks are going to react to it. So the whole thinking process has to change. The thinking has to be out of the box. That is one thing. So that's why on the bankers, we can talk about the government and the chambers, how we should, what the role we should play practically later, but this is what I would rather sincere request from the banker also. And of course, we understand there are any game, there are few people who want to play around. We need to deal with them. That is for sure.
Sure. Great, thanks.
Sorry, Kumud, do you mind if I jump in quickly on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think great conversation, and I think part of what's going to happen really is in this period, those that are not able to be relevant and adapt are going to not survive this, right? It's very clear, and we got to kind of now take advantage and say, who's going to help reimagine the way that banking works, and this has been in play for a long time, right? You take the peer lending opportunity and the platforms, things like Rucola and Cashwagon, right? These are startups which were kind of in the making. You're going to find huge uptick for these because those, it's what is going to find its way. There's going to be obstacles, but the need for entrepreneurs to really thrive and to be able to find the ideas to come to life is never going to stop. This crisis, or no matter what, is not going to stop that. We as humanity have thrived and survived for eons, way beyond this, right? So I think in many ways, this is really going to be a litmus test and force upon the incumbents and the large players of how agile and fast and how willing are they to disrupt their mindsets. And I think Nihal put it really well, right? The biggest issue has been, it's not technology, it's not process, it's people. It's our inability. And I think times of crisis like this are the times that really require for us to break the shackles. So it's going to be a huge opportunity. I mean, you take banks as an example. You can go to a bank and get $1 million to do a Baira buyback program for poultry. They don't ask questions. They view that as a reasonable risk and they'll lend you ₹1,000,000. Although all it takes is a small virus and that whole investment's gone. If an IT company that has been having 5 years of track record of making more than $2 million a year goes and says, give me ₹2,000,000 on loan without any collateral because I want to hire a new architect to be able to service a contract, our banking system today is not able to comprehend that risk and be able to lend to that. That has to change.
Kumudu, can I jump in here?
Sure, sure, Vish.
Yeah, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here. See, I'm not a banker, but I know, if you look at the non-performing loans and assets, the banks are stuck in Sri Lanka today, right? So it's not like our banks are not lent professionally or anything. It's how, and I think Nihal touched on this, what purpose is the funds really used for? And I can speak for, actually the small holder tea industry. Usually it's a chaos, right? Sometimes lending is done when the tea is still on the bush, not even made into tea, right? And when the prices are high, lending is done. And then the market falls down, they can never get out of it. So there has to be a mechanism, and maybe it's technology that is not enough in monitoring how the funds are actually working once these loans are taken. And it's not even at the SMEs, even at big corporates. Look at some of the big corporates, and I know it'll all come out now, the amount of leveraging that's gone on, right? I'm sure there's going to be lots of boardrooms in discussion of, how the hell did we get to this leveraging situation, right? There's going to be talk about why don't we have the cash to manage the next 3 months payroll, right? What did we do with it? Who asked us to come and expand to a level that we are expanded, right? So there's going to be lots of these questions that are going to come. So remember, banks don't forcefully lend, right? It's usually that, companies go ask the banks, they give fantastic cash flow statements, etc. And then whether these funds are really used, right? So I think we have to take this with a pinch of salt. While I agree with Sujiva, yes, the SMEs needs to be helped, etc. There is an issue in Sri Lanka of where these funds are used, and I think maybe Ruindu, there has to be some technology-driven thing on how these funds are put to use. I think that's a must.
Absolutely.
And I think Kumudu, you alluded to how to do business now, and I think that's what people are calling it, the new normal. I'll let you lead into that, and then we can discuss.
Yeah, exactly. No, so that's a great segue, Vish, in terms of how would as a business owner, how are you adapting to this new normal? And what's your kind of, if you were to advise, I mean, we have almost 150 people listening, how do you advise some budding entrepreneur or SME or a large corporate? How can they navigate through this? What are the kind of 5 steps that what you guys are adapting?
So I think the first thing is to first come into the realization that it is going to be a new normal. I think people are still in denial, right? So you need to come in quickly that this is going to be the new normal, and also realize we are never going to be going back to normal, because people are still thinking the day the curfew is off, we are going back to the normal. There ain't going to be a normal. It is going to be a new normal. I think we need to get that into our heads. For example, I don't think any of us will be shaking our hands with another human being, even if there is a vaccine that comes 18, 24 months. So we need to get that into our head, right? I think that's the first thing. If you are a business person, etc., things are going to be different. Second, band-aiding will not work. I think companies businesses, corporates have been band-aiding. And what do I mean by band-aiding? We don't fix the problem. We just put a patch on it. It's like a running car. You know, the times that we had the tubes in our cars, right? We put the first patch, second patch until it bursts. Then we go looking for the new tire or the tube. So that is not going to work. We need to fix the problem now, right? I think the other thing is also to adopt this whole thing of working from home, and how do we be productive from working from home. And you know, it's easier said than done to work from home, right? And why do we, in every conference, every webinar, we keep saying mute your microphone, because we don't have the right space, place in our homes to work today, right? It's going to take a little time, right? And some of us are lucky we have, but not majority of needs to change quickly. People need to adapt a little space. All these condominiums that are being built will have to quickly find a place, office space that a person can sit and work. So a lot of these things are, you know, going to be there. And the other thing I think is, in this new normal, we'll have to ask two questions: why not, and what if, right? If you don't keep asking those two questions every day, you're going to perish, right? And I think the other big thing that I keep saying is the whole thing of imagination, right? We need to have a lot of imagination. I know, you know, we struggled of getting our essential supplies. Finally, the big supermarkets figured out a way. You know, their systems crashed, etc. But now I think they're all good. But then you saw one supermarket is now having a mobile supermarket coming into your doorstep, right? They've got a truck, fully fledged. It's a supermarket that comes to your doorstep where two people can go and have the entire experience of a supermarket. It just took a little imagination, right? So this is going to be the new normal, and I can keep going on, but I think I'll let the others also comment on the new normal.
Yeah, if maybe Ruindu, you want to add on to anything, if you know how businesses should adapt, anything to add to what Vish talked about?
Yeah, for sure. I think there was actually a question that came up also about, you know, we all of us like to throw these new terms, right? So new normal has become obviously the buzz, and then everyone's jumping in on that. And so what does that really mean, right? So what's the relevance of that to, you know, the farmer, the person who's in the village? And that's a great question. I think it's something that, the way I like to think of it, is it's a huge opportunity. New normal is really what we make of it. And that's so important. These times of disruption pose an immense opportunity for those with conviction, to Vish's point, those with imagination, to really define what normal is going to be. And that's what new normal is. There are a few things to what we discussed earlier that were trends that are going to get magnified and amplified. So it makes sense to kind of embrace those and move with it. But each one of us in our own context has a huge opportunity to define their new normal, right? So you take for the villager who's, you know, not relevant to most of the conversations we're having right now. What does it really mean is, you take the examples of like Saraketa, right? What does Sri Lanka have to do? I mean, what Prasanna and the team have done with Saraketa is really go to the outskirts and source fresh, have small plots of land where these farmers are able to present their produce directly into a huge burgeoning export market. And, you know, if you look at what they've done, they've also been able to add a storyline. They've added freshness, they've added the context of the farmer, and that's been able to yield 20-30% more price point than typically the large exporters. Now, that's going to become the new normal that happens at scale for people in those villages to be able to do more of those things. So I think it's really, the point I want to make across is that for those that are able to really act with urgency and intensity and provide clarity, you become the winner to create what the new normal is and influence that on others. So I think all of us as a country need to make that for ourselves, right? And for Sri Lanka as well, it's not necessarily like we were right at the top and this pandemic has now brought us down, right? As bad as it sounds, we were anyway down here. What's happened is now we've actually leveled the playing field. So in a way, it sounds really bad when I say this, it might be a blessing in our context, we've almost been given another lifeline potentially to get our act together, really come together and really define our new normal in context of what it is for Asia, right? So how do we become the true gateway for Asia? How do we make sure that as all these companies start getting into these markets, what's the role that Sri Lanka plays in that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good thought. Let me just ask, put everybody on the spot to kind of think, say, if you were to invest your hard-earned dollar into an industry or an opportunity in the post-COVID world, what is that industry or product or sector that you would really focus on and say, hey, Sri Lanka, this is what I'm most bullish about coming out of post-COVID. Shall I start with Sujiva? I don't know if you guys, yeah. Sujiva, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute.
Yeah, you're good.
Sure. Okay. One thing I think my thinking is that we've been also discussing small and large companies and micro companies. We have to start. We don't have to think that we have to start from where we were before, but we have to start from where we are today. That's the way I'm looking at, because if you think of the way we were doing earlier in our program, but looking at the prospects today, if you look at the agricultural sector, because that needs basically re-engineering of the processes, and agriculture sector is the most vulnerable sector at this time, but it can be helped to various means. That is one sector if I'm thinking of, because of diversification, and also take the products into more standardization, as one of the panelists said, that we could take it to international level with a story behind. It's like the bottle of wine, who has a history behind the bottle of wine. We are not selling wine, but we are selling a history. So we should be able to promote that kind of thing. Then the e-commerce business, which I started recently, and I'm doing well, because I didn't think big. I thought, okay, the value chain, which I know has to be expanded through e-commerce, and I'm happy that we're doing well. And then we want to be more closer to people through e-commerce, different facet. I'm not going to do large corporate companies e-commerce, but I want to go closer to the people. How the basic today, a person who's wearing the sarong should be using the e-commerce facility to buy their things. And that's the kind of reach, because everybody today has the smartphone in their hands. So why make use of that business so that you take your product straight to your phone, right? I'm thinking bigger companies can think bigger, but let's start small somewhere so that everybody can share. So that's my thought. So I'm very positive on the developments, what I'm doing.
Very interesting. So two things, Sujiva, what you said is agriculture and e-commerce are kind of the two areas.
Yes. And finally, I just want to tell you, in order to sustain, I think you need to bring your company in front of the mirror. You need to send the company through the gym that you sometimes, try and slim yourself, cut the fat, and try to be smarter and nicer so that you could have mobility. That's the thing that everybody should be doing. I don't know whether you need to cut the staff, but make yourself presentable, right? And nice and slim and nice and healthy. So I think that's what everybody has to do.
Love the analogy of the gym, Sujiv. I think that's a winner. Nihal, what would you think are the kind of the industries, or if you were to get into something post-COVID, what do you see as the most potential?
Hello. Yes. Sorry. Well, I must start by saying that I have never invested in anything of my own except investing in somebody else's business, or that is buying shares or investing in a bank. But now since I don't want to repeat what Sujiva said, while those are all very valid, if you really want to have a focus point, I would think one of the issues that was in Sri Lanka about working from home, which is going to be part of the new norm, is the fact that we still, whether be it the government or the private sector, is largely we work on physical files. The data is actually not in a way that can be used to work from home. Okay, some companies may have gone better than others, but still it is, so I would think that we need to have a big investment in secure and cheap ways of accessing data. If you want to, so it is a subsect of technology. I would, because I don't think there are too many companies here who have actually gone to the complete digitization of their data. So I would say digitization in general.
Sure, yeah.
From an end-to-end basis, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you see a great opportunity for a company to come into the digitization of going from paper to digital.
Yeah, and have it on an end-to-end basis so anybody can work from wherever they are.
Yeah. Vish, I know you're in many industries, so pick one that you're most bullish about.
No, so before I go to that, I just wanted to, one point that I wanted to mention, and I think that's going to be one of the bigger changing points in how we adapt to the new normal, is our government adapting to the whole e-government, right? And I think we are way backwards. And I think Sujiva talked about, getting police passes and curfew passes, etc. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who is in Malaysia, and he was saying how the police issues all the passes online, and it has a barcode which is unique to the person. It's a unique ID, and we are a country that is far has unique ID numbers. And you go through these border checks or whatever, they just scan the pass, and it recognizes whether you're an authorized person to be around, etc. Not a lot of huge technology, but I think we need to push our governments to get to that whenever we have issues like this. So I think that's a very slow space, and I think hopefully people like Ruvindu will be able to make some years open, at least after this pandemic. As for what business that I would invest in, of course, healthcare, stroke, and I thought about it very carefully this morning. I think medical tourism is a huge opportunity. We have some of the best resorts in this country, which are not going to have a lot of people.
Yeah.
And just imagine when NHS comes out of this pandemic, they will be so backlogged with their normal surgeries and care, etc. Why not have all those people visit Sri Lanka, stay in some offer those resorts to a fantastic, healthcare facility where they stay in the resort, by the beach, have their appendix surgery, fly back, right?
Yeah.
So there's a huge opportunity. Like I said, you just need to imagine.
Yeah, no, that's
radical but different.
Absolutely out of the box, but a great idea. And I think the other point which you brought up about government, we've been talking a lot here, and actually many of the forums across the last few months have been about how the corporate sector needs to adapt to the new normal. I haven't seen actually a forum talking about how government should adapt to the new normal. So it's a great point. I know we have 2 minutes left. The final, Ruindu, since you're in the technology space, give us something cool.
Right now, I would put all my money on Dialog and SLT, man. Dialog's, I think, made all their money in the first quarter for the whole year. They've kind of, doubled down on what it is. But no, I think, very similar to what everyone has said. I love Vish's idea. I think, I just want to reiterate, I think anything that's this notion of exponential organizations, right? So it doesn't matter what industry. I'll be very candid. I'm not more of a, I think most of these industries, right? So there are some themes that are emerging, right? There was a drive to the bottom of the cost. Everyone was about cost. Faster, better, cheaper was kind of the mantra earlier. I think right after this, there's going to be a slowness of saying, okay, hey, you know what? I value quality, I value resilience, and I want to make sure that I can sustain. So companies that have now been able to adapt into that from a theme perspective, right, I think are going to be very important, who are not only based on cost arbitrage, but had ability to kind of deliver value at an effective cost and really provide resiliency and sustainability. I think across any of these industries, companies that have that aptitude, because to me, it's really more about the mindset and the structure of companies across any of these industries, whether it be healthcare, agriculture, tourism. I think tourism absolutely will come back. Those don't go away. They'll come back fast, and I'm absolutely in line with what we said. Sri Lanka, compared to most of our regional players, should be able to grab market share. We're structured in a way where it's perceptively safe, and we should start marketing ourselves that way right now. So yeah, I'll leave you with that. It's more thematic investments.
Perfect. Great. Hey, so with that, I know we are hitting the 12:30 mark. Just wanted to, well, let's wrap up this panel discussion. Want to thank a great panel, a great discussion. I know it's sometimes hard to have a discussion when it's multi-industry. If we were focused on one industry, I think we could go more down to the micro level in terms of what companies could do. But I think a lot of great information was covered. So thank you, panel, for participating in it. And also thank you, SLID, for organizing this this great event. Radhika, do you want to add anything? No. Okay, so great. Thank you, guys. You're on mute, Radhika.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining in. As mentioned earlier, hopefully this will be the first of many such sessions to come. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.